friendly faces. You're being spied on.
Just waiting for everyone to get admitted in.
This is your rousing homecoming, my friend.
Oh, it's gonna get pretty emotional if you ask me, I think.
We're ready. We're ready to go there with you.
Like, I remember when I was talking to the visiting writers class, like I was telling them, like, I remember when Parker was thinking this thing up, like trying to get off the ground. So the year is kind of surreal.
Yeah.
All right, I think I'll get started.
Great.
So, speaker view, okay. Hi everyone, and welcome to our second reading of the 2020 Visiting Writers Series featuring Gabriel Bump. My name is Christina Sun, and I'm a second-year fiction candidate here at UMass and a Juniper Fellow in Prose. And we're so excited to see you here and look forward to having you join us at the Waiter Readings this fall. We're dropping a link in the chat so you can register for our other events tonight. There will be a conversation and Q&A after Gabriel's reading, hosted by Jeff Parker. We encourage you to ask questions, so please drop your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll get to as many as we can. When it's your turn, Parker will ask you to unmute and you can ask your question. So the Visiting Writer Series is produced by the MFA for Poets and Writers and the Juniper Initiative for Arts in Action. The series is made possible with support from the Massachusetts Cultural Council, the University of Massachusetts Arts Council, the English Department, and our generous alumni. Books are available through Amherst Books. Take a look in the chat for a link to the bookstore. Jeff Parker is the author of the nonfiction book Where Bears Roam the Streets, a Russian journal, the novel Oven Man, and the short story collection The Taste of Penny. With Pasha Mala, he co-assembled the book of found sports poetry, Erratic Fire, Erratic Passion, and with Annie Leontis, he edited A Manner of Being, Writers on Their Mentors. His short fiction and nonfiction have been published in the Best American Non-Required Reading, Plowshares, Tin House, The Walrus, and many others. He is the co-founder and director of the Disquiet International Literary Program in Lisbon, Portugal. He currently teaches in and is director of the UMass Amherst MFA for Poets and Writers. Welcome, Jeff Parker.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. And thank you all for coming out. It's really nice to see so many faculty and students and alum and doppelgangers. You know, I need to add to my list of distinctions. I worked with Gabe Bump, because I cannot tell you how honored and proud I am to be sitting here in my basement introducing Gabriel Bump to y'all. His debut novel, Everywhere You Don't Belong, is being met with the reception it deserves, but which not all deserving books get. Gabe grew up on the south side of Chicago and later studied journalism at the University of Missouri. He returned to Chicago where he covered the youth basketball leagues that produced countless NBA players for Slam magazine, and built up his chops as a journalist while finishing school at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is where he dropped the first breadcrumbs that would lead to this book. Now we must all be grateful to the writer Adam Levin, his workshop teacher there, who pointed Gabe to UMass for his MFA. Gabe arrived here fully formed as a writer, wise beyond his years, and with a novel that he didn't even know yet was a novel in his back pocket. When you're working with a young writer like this, you make sure to do two things. Honor their work by always telling them exactly what you think, even when it may hurt, and interfering as little as possible with that near mystical process of writing a novel. And with a little luck, this is the result. Everywhere You Don't Belong has been a Library Journal starred review an Indie Next List pick, a BuzzFeed Most Anticipated Book of the Year, and a New York Times Editor's Choice selection, among many other distinctions. Gabe was recently included in a list of USA Today's 100 Black novelists you should read, alongside luminaries like Baldwin and Hurston. The glowing Tommy Orange review in the New York Times stated that, quote, Bump's meditation on belonging and not belonging, where or with whom, how love is a way home no matter where you are, is handled so beautifully that you don't know he's hypnotized you until he's done. That hypnosis Orange speaks of is a result of many things, but above all, it's a result of what Gabe does with language and sound on the page. What magic it is to hear those squiggles played by a stylus like Bump in the speaker drum of your skull. He writes like Coltrane, Mozart, or Slayer play. If you don't mind indulging me too much, I want to confess that I'm a horrible blurb writer, but I think that I wrote the best blurb I have ever written for Gabe's book. So I'd like to close by reading it to you, even though I have to acknowledge that while it might be the best blurb I've ever written, it is only the 4th or 5th best blurb on this book jacket. So I'd like to also read you what I think is the best one here by Arthur Flowers. Some works you read them and you sense that you will never quite engage life as you did before. Bump is a storyteller at the top of his game, testifying through characters we love and hate with dialogue so lean, mean, and ready, it's explosive. Everywhere You Don't Belong is a literary blues, raw and rowdy and big and brawling, yet smooth and polished and crafty, a novel that a city like Chicago deserves. Gabriel has achieved here that special confluence of the writer, the craft, and the moment that makes art we cannot afford to ignore, especially at this moment. And mine? One solace for living in dark times is they conjure singular new artists like Gabriel Bump, whose visions may shepherd us into the light. Everywhere You Don't Belong is a startlingly powerful novel, an unusual concentration of opposing forces, blind rage versus empathy, comedy versus tragedy, despair versus hope, that resists every label it evokes. Picaresque, Bildungsroman, generational family saga, political novel, comic novel, love story. It's all of those things at once and much more. An instant American classic. Please join me in giving a rousing hand for Gabe Bump. Welcome back, my friend.
Silence in the void. Yeah, I think we can just end there and we'll just call it a night. Thanks, Parker, for that introduction. This is like pretty wild for me, I guess, even to be back at a UMass, like virtually. I can, honestly say that whatever, like writing a book is like whatever, like there's a million books in the world and it's cool to do so. But like writing this book and having it nurtured by like Parker, Edie, Noy, and Sabina, I think not only made me like a much better writer than I would have been, but like a more caring and thoughtful person. And I owe you guys a lot of gratitude, I think. And this year has been like pretty cool, like with some horrors in between the highlights, I think, for everybody. But I don't know, coming kind of back to this place that, I don't know, helped make me who I am today is pretty emotional. So forgive Parker in mind's blubbering if it does come. That man means a lot to me. And yeah. So going from someone that dropped out of college, not sure what they were going to do next, to being a debut novelist, not knowing what they're going to do next, is all due to, I think, the people at UMass. So here is my book, Everywhere You Don't Belong. Came out in February. And I'm not gonna read for too long a time. I kind of want to just get into the conversation. And if I am ever mumbling, just shout in the chat and I'll raise my voice. But this story follows a young man coming of age in South Shore, Chicago, where I grew up. And it follows him as he leaves Chicago, goes to Missouri for college, as I left Chicago and went to Missouri for college. While it's not autobiographical, I think that the emotional tenor of the book is something that not only I've felt throughout my life, right? Like coming of age as a young man of color in this country that just can't seem to leave us alone and let us live our lives. And a lot of the book deals with that kind of experience. Now I think my dog is going to attack my cat. They have passed without incident. She was moving near his food. So first, I'm going to jump in and read a part of a chapter from early on in the book called Fog, which was actually part of my undergraduate thesis at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. And Parker mentions Adam Levin. Adam was one of the first people in the world to see this chapter, to say it's not good enough, but it might get you somewhere, and to keep working on it. And so I'll just begin. A lot of it's self-explanatory. So this is Fog from Everywhere You Don't Belong. Dad's friends hung out in places I couldn't go. On the other side of the tracks, down Jeffrey Avenue, deeper into South Shore. That's where Dad grew up, near the train stop to Indiana, across from the strip mall. That's where Dad's friends lived, still, in apartments clustered near mass transportation, people always coming and going and waiting and never leaving. Mom was from the Highlands, a 3-block chunk of South Shore reserved for Black doctors, Black politicians, Black bankers, and Black lawyers. All the rich people too dark-skinned for the suburbs, too poor to live downtown. Dad's friends didn't come over often. In the 60s, when they were teenagers, Coach and Dad had tipped buckets. They snuck up and tipped buckets of fish in the harbor, hauling ass through the golf course before the guy in a Vienna beef uniform could catch them. That was when South Shore was still Jewish and Irish, before expressways and white flight and manicured suburbs. When the guy in a Vienna beef uniform caught Dad, he dangled Dad by his ankles over the harbor and promised to drown him. There was a moral to that story, but Dad was never sure what it was. Coach thought the moral was don't fuck with anybody in a Vienna beef uniform. When they were growing up, Harold Washington was mayor. The Jews and Irish were almost gone. A few stubborn old men refused to leave, clung to their porches until death, didn't care about the neighborhood's changing color. Dad and Coach would recite poetry by the water. Dad, once, wanted to get a doctorate in high Renaissance art. Coach, once, wanted to play in northern Italy, make a modest living around high culture. When they were young, Dad and Coach rode their bikes through the highlands. When Dad started taking me to see Coach, Mom thought Dad was toughening me up by letting me witness a broken man break further. There was nothing tough about Coach. His wife had left him with 2 babies and moved to Florida. Dad took me to see Coach because Dad thought Coach was capable of murder-suicide. The first time Dad took me to Coach's apartment, 5 of us sat in 3 plastic chairs on Coach's shag rug. Dad bounced the babies on his knees. The empty fireplace overflowed with dusty trophies. When Coach started crying, Dad made me go into the bedroom with the babies. And then there's a scene, kind of a wacky Thanksgiving scene where Coach is invited and is introduced to the family for the first time. And after there's a food fight, spontaneous food fight that breaks out, they decide to leave. And this picks up when Coach, Dad, the babies, and Claude are walking back to Coach's apartment. Jeffrey Avenue felt quiet. Cars dodged potholes with grace. Coach stood at the spotlight and didn't say a word. We all smiled, waited for the light to change, looked at a bus struggle to stop, and nodded at the faces in the window. Outside Coach's building, I knelt in front of the babies. Dad grabbed Coach behind his neck. "Are you going to be okay?" Dad asked. "Can you come upstairs?" Coach asked. "Please." Dad carried the babies. I folded the stroller and lugged it up. Coach hummed like mad over his jangling keys. Who said God hates me? Who opened the bottle? Who sat there drinking all night and paced around the room with arms raised towards the ceiling and asked for forgiveness? Who forgot I was standing there? Who didn't hear the babies crying? Dad woke up the next day with a hangover. Coach disappeared around Christmas. The babies ended up in Kentucky or Pennsylvania. And my life went on like that. People coming and going, valuable things left in a hurry. So the next section I'm going to read is the final chapter, the final page. And I like reading those 2 sections together because that was the first thing I had written for this novel, and this final page is the last thing I wrote for it. And my editor kind of forced me to write this, and I'm glad that she did. She said, you know, we need one more beat after the action stops. And so I just sat down, and this kind of just came right out. And I think it came right out because it's what the book means to me, right? And there's an important woman in this book, Janice, who kind of stays by Claude's side throughout all of the adventures and mishaps that they find themselves getting kind of sucked into. So don't worry, there's no like spoilers. This isn't where we find out who the real killer is or anything. But here's the final chapter, Where We Belong. Sometimes when it's morning and we're both tired, I stare across the table and see Janice again in the back seat. I see her hair rattling in the wind. I feel my hand on her knee, held there for hours and miles. I see her on the beach, picking up empty shells. I hear her kicking sand. I smell salt on her shoulders. I turn to her whenever the future frightens me, the present frightens me, the past ambushes my peace, and sleep doesn't come. When the sun rises and Janice looks right at me, I see them all in her eyes. Grandma and Paul, happy, laughing, waving, safe. Everyone in South Shore, safe and happy. They're okay without us. They forgive us for leaving. We're okay too. Yes, right where we belong. That's the book.
Bravo.
Mm.
How you holding up?
Oh, good, man.
If you see either Gabe or I drinking a beer in the course of this conversation, you should know that that's a non-alcoholic beer.
Non-alcoholic, Bruce.
Yes. And your advertising monies are forthcoming from the Athletic Brewery. I'm going to start us off with a few questions for Gabe. Meanwhile, I'd invite any of you to drop a question you may have for Gabe in the chat. Jennifer, Tina, or Christina are gonna kind of keep track of the questions as they come in, and then they're gonna send me the names. And then after Gabe and I talk for a few minutes, I'll just start calling on the names, and you'll be unmuted and be able to ask your question. So now I should say that I want to make sure that we hold space here for questions of all sorts. I have a feeling that the MFA students here may want to, ask you about your journey from thesis to book and whatnot, other shop-related questions. And one of the great things about having you back is the opportunity for precisely those kind of questions. But I did want to start on some of the deeper issues of the book, because, despite the humor that rides the surface, or maybe because of it, as O'Connor said, all comic novels that are any good must be about matters of life and death. It is a serious work. So to me, the book is, and I think, since very early on, it always seemed to me that it was a dialogical novel. You give voice to 60s era civil rights activists and grandma, contemporary activistic voices of all stripes across several characters, the Black LGBTQ experience, Paul, Connie Stove, the old guard of journalism, gang members, basketball prodigies, and on and on and on. While making good fun of everyone, you manage not to make cardboard or a villain of anyone. And I think in so doing, the work just shows tremendous humanity. I think in a way, the novel is a set piece for this like polyphonic cacophony of all these voices. You could say in this reading that the point of this book is for us to hear from all these folks. So I wonder if you could say a little bit about the process of finding all these varied voices and shaping them or allowing them to shape themselves, as the case may have been.
Yeah, I think that, well, like what's a good example, I think would be like Big Columbus, right? Like an example. So Big Columbus is this kind of like gang leader / community activist who sees South Shore like falling into disarray, like particularly like violent disarray, right? As it actually was when I was in like high school, right? Like, I think that, hold on, the dog needs food. Let me just
give the dog some food.
I am guarding his food bowl behind my sweet Zoom setup. So like with Big Columbus, right? Like when I was in high school and writing for my high school newspaper, right? Like Claude does in the novel, right? I was interested in finding out what was happening in my neighborhood, right? Like why, what has happened to lead us to this point where if I am at a friend's house on a Friday night, my mom in totally atypical behavior is saying, don't come home at all, just stay where you are, right? Like, because she didn't want me coming home at night and risk me being murdered. Like that's it, like just essentially murdered. So I want to understand that as a teenager, and through reporting, like reporting is just, well, most of it is just talking to people, doing research and talking to people. So I talked to gang members, right? Like I knew people that were like friends that were like in gangs, but I didn't know they were in gangs, and they were just in gangs because everyone in their neighborhood, like all their friends were just like in gangs, right? Like it was this coming of age thing. And to me, they seemed like normal, wacky, funny, insecure teens, right? And I think that like having Big Columbus in the book as this like figurehead that isn't like all bad or all good, even though he does some pretty horrible things, I think like is important when you talk about a place like South Shore, when you talk about a place like the South Side of Chicago. And I mean, the same goes for like Jonah, this, NBA level talented 8th grader. When I was writing about basketball, like in college and some in high school, and talking to these guys that are in the NBA now, what struck me was how boring they were, right? Like even like as a 19-year-old talking to a 17-year-old, I was like, man, you guys really like don't do anything except play basketball. Like they play basketball and they play video games, and they're really good at it. And most of them are just like sweet kids that happened to be 6'7" when they were 13 years old, right? And like, I feel like those representations are like missed. I don't know, like in fiction, and then just in like nonfiction tellings of places like South Shore that are just viewed as these like monolithic Black spots. Like there's, and this will be my last part of this, but I think it's really interesting. Like for instance, the Chicago Defender is like mentioned earlier in the book. Like Jonah's parents worked for the Chicago Defender, which is a important historic African-American newspaper on the South Side of Chicago. And like Black newspapers were like the lifeblood of the community, right? And I think that like also showing how like Black communities have this way of preserving like themselves and their own history, like out of necessity, because of being so like neglected by the rest of the city, the rest of the world. And that's how my mind is messy like that. And I figured if I was going to write a book, might as well just empty out my brain onto the page and not leave anything unaccounted for. If I was going to write a novel about South Shore.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. So you picked up a lot of those voices through your journalistic work. I didn't actually know that. But what about like a figure like Grandma, who's obviously an icon from another time in the world of this book, exerts a tremendous force on the hero and everyone around her. But you know, in fact, I remember you saying that in a way she was based on your grandma, but you didn't have such intimate knowledge of your grandma, so you somehow you fictionalized this voice in a way. And like, what was the process like there, drawing out that character?
Yeah, and so I guess like just for some backstory, like the book is dedicated to my grandma, right? And like I didn't know her very well when I was growing up, because my mom is from Harlem, and her side of the family all lived in Harlem, right? When I was growing up, we didn't really see each other very often. But when my grandma got really sick, when I was in college in Missouri, she came to live with us, like ostensibly just in hospice, right? She had an incurable illness. And so when I dropped out of the University of Missouri and was back home in Chicago, and like we'd see each other a lot when I'd come back and visit from school, but like we were living in the same house together. And here was this woman who was really funny, really tough, and we got really close. And through like me, like I would like take care of her if my parents were working, like that kind of like closeness. Then when she died and we went to the funeral in Harlem, I was really struck by first like how many people in the neighborhood, you know, like knew her, right? I think that's always like if you know someone in one setting and then go somewhere else and see that they're like this kind of big, like it's like kind of jarring. But then also like it was surprising to me how many people that she had raised, right? Like I think that historically, like African American women have like shouldered the burden for a lot of evils that befall like the Black community, right? So for example, my grandma like raised some of my like mom's cousins because their parents were like addicted to heroin, right? Like there were just all these kids that were kind of just coming into her house. Like when my uncle went to jail for a really long time, like my grandma had to raise his kids, right? And so there was just all this kind of like layering this history and this really strong, like tough, smart, beautiful, funny woman who I knew as someone that couldn't walk down the stairs without me helping her walk down the stairs. And I just started writing fiction at that time. And Claude and Grandma were the first people that were in the story. And I think that some of those early like sketching, some of those early just really short like page or two stories was just imagining if it was just me and Grandma, right? Like if she had raised me, if that was in like I like my parents, like my parents are cool, right? But it was like this different experience and this way to get closer to someone that I didn't like really know that came out of that relationship.
That's a really beautiful story. I don't know if I've ever heard you say it exactly like that.
Yeah,
I mean, this book is among other things, it's a love letter to her and her generation, and that work that you described that has fallen historically on the shoulders of Black women.
yeah, and I think that like the book has grown into more than that, right? Like even in the writing, it like grew like into more than that, right? Like but definitely in the beginning and in the earlier pages, I think you can really see like it just being about Claude and Grandma, right? And Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the tragic ironies for me in reading the many good reviews of your work was, how it would often be referred to as being timely with regard to issues of police brutality and racial conflict in America. And when I would read those, I would remember our many conversations, in 2014 to 2017 when you were here. And I know that what you were writing about was Michael Brown. That's what you were thinking of. What you were thinking of was the beginnings of the Black Lives Matter movement. And here we are, how many more tragedies into that, most recently, Breonna Taylor's lack of justice. How's it been for you? I mean, you've been promoting this novel in just unimaginable circumstances to begin with, but knowing the work you did back then, thinking about, I seem to remember a conversation we had where you were even imagining, a fate for Claude that might mirror like Michael Brown's story, and it didn't go in that direction ultimately. But I mean, how has that experience been for you?
Yeah, I mean, like, well, let's see, what's a good way to put it? Like I was really worried, I was really anxious about this book, like coming out in February, right? Like as anybody that I imagine has published a book feels, right? And like the months like leading up to publication day and then the weeks after, it's kind of like all you think about, or maybe like I am like more obsessive than most people, right? But like you're just like always worrying about it. It's always in the back of your head, and then you're out like talking about it all the time, worried about how people are going to receive it. And I don't really like worry about it anymore, I guess. Like when I was on tour, I didn't read, I never read from the like riot scene, right? Like from the scene where a young Black man is murdered by the police, and then the neighborhood kind of erupts. Like I didn't read from that on tour and didn't really talk about it in interviews unless prompted, because I felt like the book was about much more than that, right? Like that's like that just felt, if you're going to write about the urban Black experience, right? Like that's an aspect that you don't have to, but one that I felt, in the moment responding to Black Lives Matter that I had to. And so this summer, it's been, I mean, surreal, right? Like, I remember in early June, my, like kind of in the heat of the initial wave of protests, like in Chicago, my dad called me when he was driving like home from work, and like was, like caught in one of the uprising, like a miniature uprising, like happening near our neighborhood. And he said, like, oh, like this is really weird. This is like kind of exactly how you described it in your novel. And you know, that's the reality, right? It's like people are pissed off. Like I'm angry. I was angry when I wrote it, and I'm angry now. I think that I'm like fortunate enough to have had, coincidentally, 2 therapy appointments scheduled for yesterday and this morning, right? So like instead of me sitting on this screen yelling at you guys about how awful the world is, I sat in a room with comfy pillows earlier this morning and yelled about how much I like hate the world and hate what this country does to people. And so that's always been a part of how I view America, how I view the world, and I think like it will continue to be an aspect of my work and my like place in the world until like America changes, right? Until like something happens here to give me some hope, right, in the world. And I guess like even to add on top of that, like there's the racial violence in the street where we have police getting away with murdering people just because they have badges, right? Which is just all it is. They're just getting away with murdering people because they have badges. And that's something that I fear happening to me. Like without a doubt, that's something I fear happening to me every day, especially in this current circumstance. And that's a difficult thing to live with. But then what I also think is an important aspect of this book, which like I'm surprised people haven't talked more about, and I wonder, like it's just interesting to me because like the Missouri section of this book was really important for me to write because I think the experience of young people of color, like in this case, a young Black male, going away to college and being in these predominantly white institutions with like no kind of institutional support except being a Black person, and somehow like that showing like saying something about the college, right? And like the reason I went to Missouri is because in the early 2000s, they had something like 4% Black population in the student body, right? And like for a state like Missouri and in the Midwest, that's pretty ridiculous. And so they had all these initiatives to bring people from Chicago like me to come down. And what ended up happening is you had like a 10% increase in the Black student body and no kind of system to make these people feel comfortable besides just cordoning them off and like making them stay with themselves. Like there was no integration into the university system. And I think the same thing happens to Claude, and I think the same thing happens to most like students of color. At least, you know, it could be changing now, you know, I think and I hope, but there's just these different ways that race and fear and just isolation can prey on young Black people and like Black adults, right? Like I'm Black adults. Like I think that that's how it always is. It's weird that it's more on the forefront this summer, but that's how it always is.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's, I mean, you know, that's what we struggle with here and what we try and hope to address and fail and try and fail better at continually. But I want to just stay with that original question for a moment, if I can, because, you know, we all know that like fiction writing's not like writing the news, obviously. But all these things, you know, these things kept happening to you in your life. And, you know, there are things like your experience in Missouri that prefigured the, you know, the horrible situation with Michael Brown and others there, the horrible situation there. You know, but, you know, that sends some people out into the streets. That sends some people, you know, in other directions. It sent you to the page, right? And I mean, to some degree, I think well, this is kind of what I'm building up to. I mean, it seems to me like your book is in a way like your answer to having had all these experiences. And now I wonder if that's indeed how you feel. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But, if you feel that in 2020, the novel, which is the mode you took, if that was an effective form of expression for that experience to take, and how you feel about like its reception.
Yeah, I mean, like I guess we talked a little bit about this in your exhaustion class, but like when I was feeling like isolated in Western Massachusetts, I like locked myself in a room and wrote a book about race. Well, not, like a book that deals with race. It's a book about a kid, like coming of age, right? And like there's some ways the race has to be a part of that if you're talking about the Black experience in America, in a place like Chicago, in a place like Missouri. So I think in that moment, that was me trying to answer questions, right? Like grappling with these ideas. Like there's moments where Claude is like actually in his head, like having this kind of argument with himself, right?
Yeah.
About like what he does, right? And that happens to me. How I feel now, I guess like a good way to put this is that every day of June and into July, I wasn't writing, I was out in the streets. And like, I couldn't write. Like I tried to write some really angry op-eds that my publisher didn't respond to, because I think that they just kindly, gave hints the way that they do. And I don't know what is kind of different about the anger I feel now as opposed to the anger that like I felt in Massachusetts and dealt with it in some way. I think that some of it has to do with the experience I had in like Missouri, which like I was, and like I, whatever. Like I was the victim of racist policing, of like racist violence, like of all these just like horrible things were stacking up. And I think that for me, like just going to Chicago and writing, going to Massachusetts and writing, like for me, that was a way to deal with like the therapy of that traumatic experience, right? Like, but now, and maybe like in the moment, maybe it worked, I don't know, but like I think that, like I said, now I go to therapy to like talk about this stuff, and the writing has felt a little different, right? Like since this book has come out, like I don't know, I think maybe just getting somewhat older, still being young, but still just trying to figure out the world and stuff. Yeah.
Well, you've always been wise beyond your years, so I imagine you're like emotionally like 39 now. That's what I think. I can just observe one thing, if you don't mind, at the risk of embarrassing you. I read one of your early interviews when the book came out, and you expressed some wish that you would be better at Twitter. Because you thought that your Twitter game was pretty weak. And, so of course I went to check it out because I'm not on Twitter. And it was all right. It wasn't as weak as you put on, but in the ensuing months, and this is the part of this that I mean, seriously, you really found your voice, I think, in a different way. And I noticed that like the world was as, you know, as your book started getting recognized, like the world kind of reacted to you differently out there in the social media space. And it seems to me like you really rose to the moment. So I think in some ways, you know, writing a book like that for a person, for an activist, for an artist like you is kind of taking a step in that direction into becoming that next thing. And, you know, it was really, really nice to see, really.
Yeah.
You know, as if we weren't proud enough over here.
Well, I mean, and then like the thing is, and I think we're all kind of like thinking about this too, right? Like since I was, I don't know, like the first books that I tried to read were like my sister's college books about like colonial revolutions in Africa, right? And like I was obsessed with the like Harlem Renaissance and the Black Arts movement, and I don't know. It's like I think we're like there's this meme going around or something. It's like, you know, if you wondered what you would have done in 1968, like you're doing it now, right? And like whatever small tiny soapbox I have, like who the hell would I be if I wasn't using it to like speak for people that can't speak for themselves, especially in that moment. Right? So I think sometimes the moment just asks things from us.
Yes, indeed. Folks are being shy. No questions have been slung my way, so I'm gonna put out a last call for any questions. It looks like Nicole Lucier, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, has a question. Can we unmute Nicole?
Hi, Gabriel. I have a sentimental attachment. You were one of the last events. Your reading with Brandon in DC was one of the last events that I went to. I think it was like your last book tour, like before, like permanently being locked in my house. So like a lot of the things that you were talking about there, I've actually like continued to think about. So I guess I just like, now that we are all in some ways physically isolated in the midst of these events, I'm thinking about this theme and like what you just said about how many students of color experience that isolation at college. And I think a lot of first generation college students, not that you were in that situation, but like I've heard from other people who were the first to go to college and didn't have a framework for what it was going to be like, or there's class differences. Like I went to a small liberal arts college and there definitely was like people who knew what that was going to be like, and then the rest of us, you know. So I've been thinking about this way in which we're like always trying to find our place, and that that's not necessarily the physical place. And so you mentioned being out in the streets, and I'm wondering if this, like through the writing of this book and thinking about these themes of place, if that's changed the way that you're relating to how you think about engaging now with events, if there's other writers or artists you're connecting with, or if you're, you know, if you feel like more, having spent this time with this sort of material, more prepared to just claim your place in your community, or, you know, just kind of what that was like.
Very cool. Well, it's nice seeing you. That's wild. Yeah, that was a really awesome event. I think I'll remember that forever with Brandon. And I guess before I answer your question, there was a funny moment that I often think about where Brandon and I started talking about cops.
Yes, I think I sparked that by being like, yeah. Why did they call the cops?
Make sure they weren't recording. Yeah, but either way, because and we were seeing way ahead of our time with our banter at that moment. Yeah. And then congratulations on Brandon for being a booker short of us. It's pretty dope. So I think that like my experience with this moment is kind of weird because like I've only lived in Buffalo for 2 years, right? And like don't necessarily like have the roots here that say I just have naturally in Chicago. right? So like when I see Chicago, I just see like artists and friends I know like out like organizing, but I know like my role here is just to be like a supporting presence, right? Like I kind of felt at some of these protests, like I was, and this isn't stuff like I learned like writing the book or like dealing with, like this is just my life, I think, right? Like so for instance, the protest, like I felt like I was like kind of watching out for the Gen Zers, right? They were like really taking over and like leading this and like marching like crazy. Like there was one kind of wild day where it was just me and some of my older friends who happened to like be organizers in the area. Like we were just doing like a spontaneous peaceful march, and pretty soon like SWAT cars and cop cars like started kind of coming out of nowhere trying to corral us, and everyone was like still pretty like shook, right? And for me, like what kicked in that instance was, all right, like this isn't necessarily my home. It's like, how do I like help these younger kids like keep their cool, right? And so just like talking to the young man, women that was leading it, and saying, you know, like at one point we're gonna like run up to these cops, like people are looking at you, you have to not do anything, right? Like you have to be the calm person, let them hit you first, is what I said to him. It was like kind of weird. And so I don't think that's anything I learned like from the book, right? Like from the writing of it. I think that's just, I don't know who I am. I think like my outlook is that let the evil people do a good enough job showing that they're evil, right? And like our job is to just kind of maneuver it.
Yeah, it's kind of just as a follow-up, and because I saw you read with Brandon, like the themes that are parallel together. I think of your two books together. I read them both in the same week, and one thing in both of them is this question of like, in like you say, the Missouri part, when how are the other students around you going to react? These two Black kids on the paper are being tasked with doing this research, and everyone else is like, whatever, so. And then also in Brandon's, there's numerous moments at these dinner parties or wherever where you're like waiting to see if the white people are going to like say anything, do anything different. And so, I think of that, and like over the course of these events this summer, the protests, at the same time, I'm a parent, and our school has been going through conversations about equity and remote learning and conversation, and it's the same question of like, how do we find our place? And if we're just waiting, and it sort of sparked this consideration of what is our role of support, but also like, where are those spaces where there are, one or two Black parents, and they can't always be on the spot speaking up, doing those things. And so it's this this learning about like, how do we participate in other people's isolation in ways of not maybe thinking that we have a place, like it's just kind of like claiming space, but also creating space. So
yeah, what I've actually come to like think about it, I think it's becoming abundantly clear, is that like like Black people aren't the ones that are going to solve racism.
Or it would be done.
So. Yeah, like it's not like whatever, just for a myriad of reasons, right? And so I think like, yeah, Brandon and I's books, and then how kind of I think of experiences in like areas of high education, is to like just make them places that are okay for anybody to be. I don't know, like there's this idea, I think we sometimes mix in this idea of like challenging people intellectually and challenging people like spiritually, right? Like why does, like we talk about like a classroom as a safe space, it's like like someone saying something racist to me in class like isn't necessarily like them I don't know, like intellectually challenging me. It's like just them being an asshole, right? Like, and I think that there should be a recognizing differences there, I guess, if that makes any sense.
Great. We've got one question from Alex Terrell. Alex, can you unmute?
Is it working now?
Hey, Alex, we can hear you.
Hi, sorry, I can't take my, hi, first of all, hi, Gabe.
Yeah.
Hi, I cannot put my video on because I injured my back and I'm laying down, so I'm sorry.
It's all good.
I hope you feel better.
I'm fine, thank you, I'm fine. I just, I can't sit up for several hours in the day. Anyway, that's besides the point, I'm getting off track. The point is that I have a question. So it's actually sort of like a part A and B question. So how many, how many would you say in terms of revision, how many times did you have to go over the book? Like, just how many times did you have to do a full revise? I know you talked about it a little bit in Parker's class earlier, but I was just thinking from start to finish, how many times do you think you revised, if you're comfortable talking about that? And the other part of the question is, what's your revision process like for a novel?
Yeah, so in terms of big revisions, I probably did 2 big ones. I did one huge one with my agent, and then which was probably 120-page swing, right, between cutting and adding. And then I did a pretty substantial one with my editor at Algonquin, right before it went to presses. It was kind of an emergency thing, so that was fun. But that was maybe cutting out 20 or 30. And what my revision process actually is, because I I'm a pretty stubborn writer, so I'll write through a plot line that shouldn't be there, but I'll write it for 50 pages and introduce all this wild stuff. Just want to get to the end. And as a result of that, when I'm revising, I end up having to just cut huge sections and start over again. So my I don't know, my revision process is less precision and more chainsaw, I guess. If I could say, which I don't know, it kind of keeps me from outlining too much and still writing into the surprise and stuff like that.
Thanks.
Feel better, Alex.
I'm sorry. I really
No,
hate just making you talk to the a black box, but it's just you don't want to see this.
This is
Always good to talk to you.
Yeah.
Alex. Gabe, you may have forgotten, but you rewrote it almost completely in year 3. You rewrote a good chunk of it.
Is that? Oh, Jesus.
She gave me a 200-page version at one point, and you did a lot of work on that thing before the thesis. So
I think that was loud.
But I guess those days are all a blur after.
Yeah, or just
that comes after.
I think have been repressed.
Well, let's close with a very good question from an alum and old friend, Andy McAlpine. Andy, do you want to unmute and ask?
Hey, what's up, dude?
Oh man, baby!
It's good to see you. It's really, really great to hear you read. The book is just like a knockout. And I guess I know you mentioned that it was, you're having a tough time sort of writing these days. But I guess I'm just curious where you want to, where you see maybe the next thing going, what you're excited about, where your creative vision is kind of heading, and what to expect.
Yeah, cool. Wait, what's the little one's name?
Oh, that's Frankie.
Hey,
Frankie, say hi.
Hey, man. Oh man, it's so nice to see you guys. Yeah, so I mean, what I think that one of the reasons I haven't been writing that much is one, like my attention span is totally shot. I'm bored and afraid all the time, and so like it's hard to get the energy. But like I have like my second book is just got back from my editor, so I have like about 6 months to put that together, and then working on a Buffalo book. So I think I'm just like taking a writing vacation. Like I'm working on some screenplays, and just trying to give that a shot, and messing around with some other like mediums. Yeah, writing fiction is hard and it takes a lot of time. Isn't that right, Frankie? Writing novels is hard work, and so like I feel like I burnt myself out a little bit over the last couple of years and just needed to recharge.
Thanks, Gabe.
Yeah.
So great seeing you guys.
Good to see you.
Thanks, guys. Well, we're over, but you were worth it. So I just wanted to say thank you for coming back. Thank you for doing this. Congratulations on all your success.
Yeah.
May there be more.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess I'll say it again, but Parker, you know, you mean the world to me, Doc.
Goes both ways.
And I think, is Ding Dong Levin Adam Levin sneaking in here?
Looks like it. That's what it looks like to me.
I love you too, Adam.
All right, I gotta turn this over to Christina's son, who will professionally shut it down, unlike my amateur shutdown. So, good night. Good night, all.
Everybody.
Wow, thank you, Gabe, for coming back virtually to your old stomping grounds to read. Thank you to Parker, one of our fiction faculty and director of the MFA. Remember, Amherst Books carries Gabe's novel, and we'll drop that link in the chat again. And thanks as well tonight to Chena Merriwell and Jennifer Jacobson for assistance with producing this series. We hope you'll join us on October 29th at 6 p.m. for a reading with Maza Mengistu, author of The Shadow King, which is on the shortlist for the Booker Prize, so that's very exciting. You can register for that on the MFA website. We'll drop that link in the chat too. And lastly, MFA alum Sejal Shah is reading from her new book on Tuesday, September 29th at 4:30 p.m. Eastern. So we'll leave this window open for a couple more minutes, but thanks again for coming out, and good night, and we hope we'll see you at our future readings.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a good night.